Well. We thought it could be a quiet day. It hasn't been. A hockey trade. Cozens for Norris. Let's talk about it. Coming up on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
Your Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up? Thanks for tuning in to this Friday edition of the Locked On Sabres podcast, this trade deadline edition of the podcast. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. Check us out on our YouTube channel where you can like and subscribe to the show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is presented by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Also, would like to encourage our listeners to sign up for our Locked On Sabres text club. Today would have been a very valuable day for that. Getting text alerts. Maybe you're at work and you can't check Twitter every second of the day to see if the Sabres are going to do anything. And if you want to find out pretty quickly, the text club's good for that. News on, of course, practices and stuff throughout the season, and then the games and, conversation back and forth. Join subtext.com/LockedOnSabres is the place to sign up for that. Sticky Doty Biasi, happy to talk to you a little early today. So my plan was I'm going to wait until the Sabres announce that they're done. And that'll be usually 4 o'clock, roughly an hour after the deadline has passed. And I'll talk about how they did nothing, how they traded Henry Jokiharju for a 4th round pick, or they swapped AHL guys, or whatever it ends up being. And I am presently surprised and happy to be talking and recording this episode at 1:34 in the afternoon, an hour and a half before the deadline even passes, in part because I wanted to get this in early, because this trade itself is going to take up an entire episode, no doubt. And if they don't do anything else, if they do something else, maybe if there's a Jokiharju trade or something bigger, then we can get to that coming a little bit later on today. I would record that. So we'll see what we get. But I wanted to get in now. Couldn't hold back anymore. That does mean, by the way, that a trade could break while I'm recording here. I've got Twitter open just in case that happens, but I'm guessing that's probably not going to happen above a Jokiharju trade. But anyways, here to talk about this giant hockey trade, giant by Sabre standards for sure, of Dylan Cozens on the move to Ottawa, and the Sabres are acquiring Josh Norris from the Senators, a centerman, and they are also getting a couple of other players, one other player along the way, Jacob Bernard-Docker, a 4th liner, and then the Sabres are sending Dennis Gilbert in a second to Ottawa. So in totality, Cozens, Dennis Gilbert, and a 2026 second-round pick for Josh Norris and Jacob Bernard-Docker. That's the trade Kevyn Adams swings with Ottawa. And it was a little bit surprising to me, not that they were able to get a deal done with Ottawa in their division, not even that they were able to acquire a player of Josh Norris's caliber. It's that they were able to send Dylan Cozens pretty much for more value than I thought that they would get. We'll get to the Cozens part of this later on in the show, kind of an obit on his Sabre career as it comes to an end here. I just did not believe. I guess I never believed it. There was noise all year, and I probably should have. The Red Wings were interested, and this team was interested, and Vancouver is interested, that the league sees value in Dylan Cozens and believes that his struggles are more to do with the Buffalo Sabres than they are to do with his own game. And I just think it's above and beyond that. Change of scenery, maybe it ends up helping him. But I can't believe that he got Josh Norris back. Now, there is a overall take here that's pretty easy to get to, that there's a gamble on both sides. The value of the trade is actually not that bad because there is a gamble on both sides, but it's a different type of gamble. With Cozens, the Senators are gambling on he's going to be the player he was 2 years ago again. And the Sabres gamble is Josh Norris is just going to stay healthy. He's been a very good player when he's on the ice. It's more about health, shoulder injuries and whatnot. So what's the bigger gamble? Is it betting on the guy that's been hurt all the time to stay healthy? Or is it betting on a guy that's been on the ice to suddenly, and been playing poorly, to suddenly start playing better? And in my opinion, I'll take the health gamble. Give me the guy that has been performing on the ice when he's out there, rather than the guy that, like, Cozens has been out there and we've just been trying to figure out what's going on with him. What happened? That's a puzzle. Norris, it's not a puzzle. I know what I got to do to get him to win this trade from the Sabre front. It's just whether or not he can stay healthy. And that's definitely a question to get to. So we'll get to Josh Norris as a player. But first off, on Kevyn Adams making this deal, credit to him, credit where credit's due. You know, there's a select few out there still, not many, but a select few that are still holding the attitude of, oh, fans will just criticize Kevyn Adams no matter what he does because 14-year playoff drought, and you do this and you criticize him, and you do that and you criticize him. Today is a very clear and obvious example, which, of course, this was clear and obvious the whole time, which is, no, if you just make a trade that fans, a big one, a shakeup, if you're willing to get rid of your own and don't fall in love with them, fans are going to applaud you. And for the most part, I think Sabre fans have applauded the Buffalo Sabres today. If you want to really search out and find, you know, the select few fans that hate it, then you could always find that. There's enough of anything. But I think the overall sentiment from Sabre fans is this is a good trade. And I got to be honest. In the moment the trade was made, this is probably my number one trade that I've liked the most upon completion. Like the day the trade happened, the minute the trade happened. This is my favorite trade the Sabres have made in a decade. Tim Murray, at least. Go back to like the O'Reilly trade, maybe. The O'Reilly trade on draft day. Or it's close with last year. I really liked the Middlestat for Byram trade when it happened. The day they traded Matt Savoy for Ryan McLeod, I was more skeptical. I didn't hate it, but I was definitely skeptical. It took me some warming up to start to like that trade. On this, like the first time I saw it, I was going, oh man, that's a bad deal. That was my instinct. And then, you know, you read up on McLeod a little more and you start to think about where the Sabres are a franchise. I got to liking the McLeod trade, but not in the moment. This trade I loved in the moment, the second it happened. Now, I've been a little harsh on Cozens all year long, so that shouldn't be too surprising to you if you're an everydayer, you listen to the show consistently. I just have not believed that there is an answer for Dylan Cozens. I don't know what it was supposed to be. I have always believed and have said that he is overrated as a defensive player, that his nickname, the workhorse for Whitehorse, gives him more credibility in that area than he deserves. So I was perfectly okay with the idea of trading away Dylan Cozens. It took a little bit of homework on Norris to see, like, okay, why was he available? Why was Ottawa looking to trade him? The things I did know about him on the surface were his ability as a shooter and power play. But the more complete picture of Norris as a player has me liking the deal even more. So credit to Kevyn Adams for being willing to part with one of his own and swinging this deal, pushing and pushing and pushing for the hockey trade, even when it seemed like maybe he wouldn't be able to pull it off. That was the kind of the public, you know, perception early in the week. He found a way to get it done. And when you do the thing that everyone wants to see you do, which is action instead of inaction, you deserve a golf clap for that. And I'm here to give Kevyn Adams his golf clap here on a Friday before knowing if there's even anything else to come. Before we swing back into this trade, I want to get more in depth on, one, Josh Norris as a player, two, Dylan Cozens' obit on his Sabre career. There's two other things I want to touch on very quickly. One, the second round pick that's going back in this deal. You might see a couple of tweets and comments, calls on the radio about, why did we have to give up a second round pick? If this was such a even gamble, why do I have to give up a second round pick? That's almost another area I want to give Adams credit. you just don't have to worry about second round picks. They're not really that valuable. They're not nearly as valuable as you think they are. It's like a 20% hit rate for the guy to play in the NHL, not even be an important player, like to play in the NHL past like 1 year. So I'm glad Adams didn't get hung up on that, because that can happen. Once upon a time, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever the timeline is, Jason Botterill is the Buffalo Sabres general manager. And there's a trade on the table that is down the road, like close to completion, that involves Rasmus Ristolainen going to Winnipeg for Nikolai Ehlers. And the deal fell apart because the two GMs couldn't decide on which side should get an additional mid-round pick as part of the deal. The deal fell apart on a mid-round pick, which is worth nothing. Just getting hung up on almost the view of it. Like, oh, I got more than you. I'm getting the extra draft pick. My guy should be worth more than your guy. Adams didn't get hung up on that in this deal being willing to give that second round pick in the deal. I want to give, again, another golf clap for that. And the other thing that we'll maybe touch on more in our next episode, more of an overall recap of the whole deadline itself. JJ Peterka. Peterka to the Rangers seemed like it might be happening late on Thursday night. It didn't. And it's weird that two national reporters, Renaud Lavoie of TVA up in Canada and Frank Saravelli of the Daily Faceoff, both reported along the same lines that Peterka to the Rangers, those talks were advanced and that it was maybe even impending that he was going to go to the Rangers. And since then, between Arthur Staple, who covers the Rangers locally in New York, and Chad DiDomenicis, expected Buffalo, who's earned his flowers today, all over it as a Sabre insider, all over it. I mean, he's the guy you're seeing the most of on social media, and he had it on Cozens. He was the first to it. He had it on Peterka that wasn't happening, that there's no truth to that. Chad has been all over it today. So, and he also said, no, there's no truth to Peterka to the Rangers, that they have been shutting the door on everybody for that one. Weird though, right? My mind quickly goes to why do I have two national insiders that are being fed bad info? And my mind went to, I wonder if it's the agent, because Peterka's up for a contract at the end of the year. And you might even wonder a little bit about his future with the Sabres. You wouldn't wonder too much about it, but why do I have that there were advanced talks with the Rangers if there weren't? And maybe it's some leverage game being played by the agent with a contract coming up. I'm not sure, though. I'm not sure. So, no truth to the Peterka rumor. I'd be surprised if he were traded here on deadline day. Back to the Norris for Cozens trade. When we come back, what are the Sabres getting from Josh Norris? What type of player, where in the lineup he should play, the age, the contract, advanced numbers, all ahead here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. Hey, if there were odds on the Sabres making a big trade today, I would have been betting on the no. I would have set the line at minus 500 on no. And if you bet the other way, you would have cashed out. So when the games tip off, the NHL action just getting started, there is no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to be in on a third period comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. I love using FanDuel, especially for the live betting feature. Not going to lie, I did go the emotional hedge route last night betting against Buffalo, and that worked out because it often does. Keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team or, again, going the emotional hedge route. Never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Sneaky Joe DiBiase back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. The Sabres trading Dylan Cozens to Ottawa for Josh Norris. some other pieces in the deal, but that's the meat of it. Dennis Gilbert, by the way, Buffalo boy, going to Ottawa. I'm sure they didn't want to do that, but you weren't going to let this deal get hung up on Dennis Gilbert. And Ottawa's pushing for a playoff spot. They might feel like Gilbert, tough-nosed defenseman, could help them do that a little bit. By the way, if you're wondering, yes, I am aware the Sabres paid Jason Zucker an extension today. We'll talk more about that on our next show, more of an overall from today. 2 years, $4.75 million, though, if you missed the news. That is official from the Buffalo Sabres. Zucker is here to stay. They signed him and Greenway. To Josh Norris, newest Buffalo Sabre, who, by the way, this is more of a minor thing to kind of start off the Josh Norris talk with, but I don't know what number he's going to wear. He has worn number 9 throughout his time in Ottawa. That's currently owned by Zach Benson. He wore number 14 for the U.S. Team USA in the World Juniors and for Michigan, played college hockey at Michigan. That's retired, of course, Rene Robert. He wore number 39 in the U.S. National Team Development Program as a junior. 39's taken. Dominic Hasek, jersey retired. And then it's only 3 games. The first 3 games of his career in 2019-20 as a rookie, he wore the number 37. 37 is available, but you probably know how that works, right? When those rookies show up, they don't pick that number. That number is often just chosen by a trainer or equipment manager. They just give it to you for the first couple of games, and then they'll let you pick your number when you're a full-timer. So I doubt there's any meaning to 37. So what number does he end up going with? Maybe he goes like with a 90 or a 91. That would be cool. Otherwise, maybe it's brand new. I also saw that he could pick number 10, maybe would be a possibility, but Henry Jokiharju as of the second is still on the roster. I'm expecting that he'll be gone by then. So maybe 10 is a spot. Either way, what the Sabres are getting in Josh Norris compared to Dylan Cozens, they are getting more of a goal scorer. They are getting a better defensive player, and they are getting a far better contributor when it comes to the power play. Let's start with a couple of charts. You know I love my charts, and that's where we're going to start things off with today's show when we talk about Norris and comparing him to, especially comparing him to Dylan Cozens. So Evolving Hockey, you pull up the player cards for both of these guys, and what do you find on Josh Norris? All right, goals above replacement. Let's take a look at goals above replacement. Josh Norris is in the 59th percentile offensively. This is just this season, by the way. And defensively, he is in the 74th percentile. Okay? 66 overall. That compared to Dylan Cozens, it's far better than it is Dylan Cozens. Dylan Cozens, 55th percentile offensively, 6th percentile defensively. That is a big difference between the two. Dylan Cozens and Josh Norris. Okay? So you are getting a better overall hockey player than Dylan Cozens. As I continue to reiterate, Cozens is not as good a defensive player as you think he is. Norris is. And every year of his career, it's been pretty good. And that's all nice and well, but the goals have been more consistent throughout Josh Norris's career than they have been throughout Dylan Cozens' career. Now, remember, Norris has the injury factor. So some of these numbers are going to look worse than they are, but the games played, you have to factor that in. Cozens in his career, 4 goals in 41 games, 13 goals in 79 games. There's the big 31 goal season in 81 games, 18 goals in 79 games, 11 goals in 61 games. Okay, so one season where his pace would have been above 20. 1 out of 5 where his pace would have been above 20. Norris, meanwhile, 17 goals in 56 games. That's the rookie year. 35 goals in 66 games. We're going to wipe out his 22-23 season. He only played 8 games that year, and he scored 2. Last year, 16 goals in 50 games, and this year, 20 goals in 53 games. All 4 seasons where Norris played a meaningful amount of games, his pace was at least 20. And he has that big 35-goal season in 66 games, which is almost a 40-goal pace. So The goal scoring is there, and you see it. When you watch him, the release on his shot is far better than Dylan Cozens is. And part of what makes him a better goal scorer is his ability to stand over there on the right flank and rip one-timers on the power play. And that was never Dylan Cozens' game. He played on the power play. He just wasn't very effective. So, Josh Norris, what does he give the Sabres in part? An upgrade on the power play. Cozens in over 300 games in his Buffalo Sabre career, 341 games, had 12 power play goals. Josh Norris in 236 career games has 33 power play goals. He is more than triple as good as Cozens as a power play scorer. And that's important. The fact that he's also a left shot doing that is key because Thompson is a right shot. So now on this power play going forward, you could have Dahlin at the top, Thompson on his one-timer on the left, Norris on his one-timer on the right. To me, that's big. So I'm getting a defensive upgrade. I am getting a power play upgrade. Where you are downgrading is his ability to carry the puck. Cozens, even though he hasn't been great in most of these seasons, especially the last two, what Cozens wants to be as a player and what he was at his best 2 years ago was a puck carrier, flying through the neutral zone with speed, playing fast, setting other guys up. Cozens was a puck carrier. 2 years ago, the goal scoring was there. He was an amazing puck carrier guy. You look at some of the zone entry numbers for Dylan Cozens, and they were top-notch. That is not Josh Norris. Josh Norris is more somebody that could play away from the puck a little bit. He is a fine puck carrier, but not the level that Cozens was at his best. He is a centerman, though. So almost maybe a little more like Thompson, where Thompson splits the puck carrying duty a lot with Alex Tuck when he plays with him. And Cozens doesn't often split that duty. It was him. Norris is going to be someone more like Thompson, who I bet is going to split that duty. So you're going to want him with another guy that is capable of carrying the puck with speed at a good rate through the neutral zone. Maybe you think JJ Peterka is capable of being that for Norris. You might want one guy that can kind of help him in that duty. But otherwise, really good face-off guy, 52.5% for Josh Norris. 5% better than Dylan Cozens, who was at 47% for his career. And you've got a slightly smaller player, but it's pretty close. 6'2", 196 for Norris, 6'2", 207 for Dylan Cozens. Pretty comparable on that front. And then you have the contract. The contract for Josh Norris in comparison to Dylan Cozens is pretty close. The Sabres will be paying a little bit more for Josh Norris. Cozens, remember, $7.1 million on his deal, whereas Norris is $7.95 million. And he's under contract until 2030. So he is in year 3 of an 8-year deal. So year 4, year 5, year 6, year 7, year 8. You got 5 more seasons on this contract. And then he'll be 31 at that point. He does not have any trade protection, which is part of the reason why the Sabres made this deal. A 10-team no-trade list kicks in the 2026-27 season. So he does become the Sabres' highest-paid forward, coming in about $0.8 million over Tage Thompson. Not bad, though, at all. Under $8 million. It's a risk because of the injuries. And again, look at the games played in his career. 56, 66, 8, 50, and this year, 53. It's a little reminiscent of Bo Byram. But the knock on Byram when the Sabres made the hockey trade for him a year ago was concussions and injury risk. Byram, looking back on his career, what is it? 19 games, 30 games, 42 games, 73 games last year. So leading into his time with the Sabres, it was he's not ever played a full season, but he was in the midst of playing a full season. And that's where you're at right now with Josh Norris. Josh Norris, shoulder problems in his career have completely killed seasons for him. And he's never played more than 66 games. But he's on pace to this year, 53 games. If he stays healthy, he'll get to 70 on the season. So kind of like Byram. You gotta hope he stays healthy. But if he does, you're probably gonna win this trade. That's my overall sentiment. If Josh Norris is able to do what he's doing this year, which is stay healthy and remain on the ice, play 70 games a year, the Buffalo Sabres are going to win this trade. Because, Cozens could return to his form, change the scenery. But I like Josh Norris straight up as a hockey player a lot more than I do Dylan Cozens. For me, it's not close. I'm not saying he's miles better at everything, but he's a better goal scorer. He's a better defensive player. He's a better 5-on-5 player. He's a better face-off guy if you want it. I just think Josh Norris is a better hockey player. I feel like the Sabres got the best player in the deal. And I think that the Sabres, including a second-round pick, signifies that this is the best player in the deal. We will, if you're wondering, I will save the Gilbert for... excuse me, I'm so into it on Norris that I'm forgetting. I'm already forgetting the other player's name that they acquired. Jacob Bernard Docker. I want to get into JBD for short. We're going to be calling him, I'm sure. We'll talk more about him, the Zucker extension, the Peterka rumors when we cap the trade deadline day as a whole on our next show. But when we come back, the obit on Dylan Cozens' career. What went wrong and what is ahead for him in Ottawa? We'll get to that when we come back here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. Sneaky Joe DiBiase back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Just doing a check of Twitter again, just making sure there's been no deal. We got an hour from time of recording until the deadline. So I'm sure we'll get at least one more deal, but we will see. Let's get to what the Ottawa Senators are getting out of this deal, and let's talk about Dylan Cozens and kind of what happened, because he was a well-liked player right to the very end. He was a well-liked player, but it was starting to go sour in every direction, right? Think of what happened last night. So the Sabres blow this lead. We haven't touched on the game yet, and we probably won't because it's deadline day. Maybe a little bit on our next show. Cozens is standing behind the net against Tampa, and his captain, Rasmus Dahlin, is throwing punches over the net, and he's fighting two guys at the same time. He's got Anthony Cirelli here, and he's got Brandon Hagel here. Both of those two are throwing with gloves on punches at Rasmus Dahlin. And there's no other Sabre in the vicinity. Samuelson is trying to get a hold of them. Cozens is standing there on the video. You see the back angle, doing nothing. Nothing. Polar opposite. Neutered version of the player that we saw 4 years ago at the Heritage Classic in Hamilton, Ontario, when Rasmus Dahlin was cross-checked in the throat by Austin Matthews. I think a move that, by the way, got Matthews suspended. Your best player at the time was cross-checked in the neck. What did Dylan Cozens do the next shift? He went out and he ran Austin Matthews, the best player on their team. Ran him. And then had to fight Zach Hyman and did a great job doing it. That was the Dylan Cozens that we knew then. That is when it was being talked about as him being the next captain of this hockey team. Then he goes out in 2022-23, and he was awesome. 31 goals, 37 assists, 68 points. And oh, by the way, remember one benefit he didn't have that Tage Thompson had when Thompson put up his career year was his line mates. Thompson played with a point-per-game, 30-goal Jeff Skinner and a 30-goal point-per-game Alex Tuck. Two veteran forwards still in their primes on either side of him. Who was Dylan Cozens playing with? Two rookies. JJ Peterka and Jack Quinn just entering the NHL, neither player reaching 15 goals on the season. He scored that production not playing with a guy that got to 15 goals on the year. So, yes, Dylan Cozens had an amazing year. And then, poof. And you could blame the Garnet Hathaway fight last year, and maybe that did have something to do with it. My number one reason, the speculation on my part, because we don't really have a good answer to this question. What happened to Dylan Cozens? My answer, connecting dots, because he was never a good defensive player, and I never thought he was a great thinker. But it didn't matter because he was so fast and big, right? 6'3", 207, able to move like that. Play fast, play on instinct. You don't have to think the game when you play like that. Then what did the Sabres do? They changed their style from fast, score as much as you want, make mistakes, don't be afraid, to, all right, well, let's button it up. Let's button it up. Let's slow the game down a little bit. Let's play more responsibly in our own end. And I think a Dylan Cozens, put his nickname aside, he was a fast and instinctual player that was not very good defensively. When you plug in a fast, instinctual, lack of defensive game player into a system and a philosophy that the Sabres have been playing for the last 2 years, that's what it's going to look like. And what that makes Dylan Cozens, though, at this moment, in my opinion, what Dylan Cozens is he is system dependent. To get the great results out of Dylan Cozens, you've got to be willing to play a system that the Sabres played 2 years ago. And Dylan Cozens' problem might end up being there are not many teams in the league that play like that. Ottawa's not one of them. There are not many teams that are willing to play wide open, make as many mistakes as you want. So he's going to have to really evolve as a player, in my opinion. And maybe he will. He is still very young. He just had his 24th birthday. And a change of scenery, maybe a wake-up call. I'm not putting it past him to develop in those other areas. But it was becoming more and more clear that development that was needed was not going to happen here. It just wasn't. You were just wasting time every day that he was a Buffalo Sabre. He was fine. Like there were moments where he was like a bottom six centerman that can score some goals for you, but it just wasn't going to work here, in my opinion. And when you start losing the heart of the guy, when your captain's getting beat by 2 players and your instinct isn't to jump right in, that tells me something's not clicking upstairs right now. And he needs a wake-up call. And Ottawa maybe will give it to him. There is no element to me of being afraid of Dylan Cozens going to Ottawa and becoming a great player. And the reason why I said this the other day, it's different than for Eichel or Reinhart, is the light bulb was already on for those guys. When you traded them, like I was terrified of what they were going to do because I know how great they are. Cozens, the light bulb's not on. And it probably was never getting turned on here. So there's no, well, I could have had that. That is the fear that is the great player going elsewhere and winning, right? Eichel wins the cup, and what do you say? Well, what do some say? Well, I could have had that because that's how great Eichel is. He always was great. Cozens, if he goes to Ottawa and has a great run with the Senators, I'm not going to say, oh, I could have had that. I don't think I could have had that. I think the only way he's becoming that player was it was going to happen somewhere else. So to me, no bitterness whatsoever over what he becomes. And I hope for his sake that he does well. The number one Dylan Cozens moment, even better than that Heritage Classic, running Matthews and then the fight, better than that for sure, in my opinion, is Ryan Miller night. That I am in the arena for that game with my brother. We loved Miller as kids, so we went. And we are like 10 rows behind one of the nets. And it ends up being the net that the game-winning goal was on. And the Sabres go to overtime. And you want them to win because then they'll bring Miller out on the ice and you get the ovation from the crowd. And it's a famous goal. One of the nicest goals in years for the Sabres. Cozens is the centerman, wins the draw. And Dahlin's got it now. And Dahlin backing up in his own end. Cozens runs a route almost, like a wide receiver. Spins and gets behind the defender. And Rasmus Dahlin throws the most beautiful pass over every player like a comet flying through the sky. And it lands. Cozens has to do a good job. Watch that goal back, the highlight of it. Cozens has got to do a good job corralling it because it's probably a good 6 inches off the ice when it arrives at Cozens' stick. So he's got to kind of knock it out of the air. And he does. And then he walks in on Ilya Sorokin and he roofs it. Or maybe side of the net, whatever. He scores the goal. He beats Sorokin. He jumps into the glass. Everyone parades off the bench. It was a full house. The crowd was going nuts, which of course is rare these days. And Miller comes out on the ice and they give him the standing ovation. Absolutely the number one Dylan Cozens moment, in my opinion, of his Buffalo Sabre career. But there are still some good ones. Again, good luck to him in Ottawa. I think it could work, but I'm not betting on it working. I think he'll be what he's been here. I think he's going to be a guy that scores 15 to 20 goals. He is not going to be very good defensively, and I bet Ottawa fans are going to not be thrilled within a year from what they get in Dylan Cozens. But that's just a guess. 208, no other trades. We'll rejoin you on the show later today or tomorrow, depending on when you're listening, but once the deadline's over, I'll take a listen to what Kevin Adams has to say, and we'll get into Jason Zucker. We'll get into the other pieces of this trade, JBD, that we'll talk about as well. And we'll get to all the stuff that happened. League-wide, too. Mikko Rantanen, Mitch Marner. Nothing happened with Mitch Marner, by the way. Rantanen did. That'll be next time here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Locked On NHL, place to be today as well. All the NHL trade deadline news coming your way wherever you get your podcast, as well as on YouTube. We'll talk to you later today here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.